Good morning, and thank you for tuning into the Global Current. I'm Adeline Patterson.
And I'm Mallory Finn.
Today in news, the United States sends 4,000 troops to Poland to support NATO allies.
The Nigerian military accidentally bombs a refugee camp. In analysis, the impact that the United States' decision to deploy troops to Poland will have on the U.S.-Russian relations.
And the annual Middle East Peace Conference is held in Paris.
Then, Daniel Kim brings us an interview with Seton Hall's professor, Catherine Tinker.
And now Jacob Abel reports on U.S. troop movements in Europe.
On January 14, 2017, 1,000 U.S. Army personnel from the 3rd Armored Combat Brigade were deployed to Zig, Poland in an effort to show support for NATO allies and to send a message to an aggressive Russia. This is the first wave of a planned 4,000 troops to be deployed across Eastern Europe. CNN reports that these troops will participate in exercises in Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Bulgaria, and Hungary. The U.S. ambassador to Poland, Paul Jones, was quoted as saying that the deployment of U.S. troops in the support of NATO shows an ironclad commitment. The Guardian reports that 87 tanks and 144 armored vehicles will arrive with the initial deployment of U.S. troops.
This deployment is defensive in nature. It is intended entirely to shore up our defenses along the eastern flank. It is motivated, at least in part, by some of the destabilizing and even escalatory actions that the Russian military has undertaken over the last year or so.
In Moscow, the large deployment of U.S. troops is viewed as a threat, with Russian President Vladimir Putin's spokesperson saying, "We perceive it as a threat. These actions threaten our interest, our security." Russia has grown more aggressive in its behavior towards NATO member countries. Newsweek reports that NATO aircraft intercepted Russian aircraft 110 times in 2016, including 43 times over the Baltic Sea. This number is down from 160 in 2015 and 140 intercepts in 2014. One high-ranking NATO official thinks the drop from 2015 to 2016 is due to Russia's intervention in Syria. The mass deployment of U.S. troops marks an important milestone for NATO, as Fox News reports that this is the first time that any Western military force has been continuously deployed to NATO's eastern allies. The U.S. troops arrived to the delight of Polish citizens, as many U.S. soldiers reported having great interactions with local citizens. Russian aggression continues to concern the NATO powers, and U.S.-Russia relations remain murky. This is Jacob Abel reporting for the Global Current.
Up next, Ian Fauché brings us a report on Nigeria's accidental bombing of a refugee camp.
The Independent reports that on Tuesday, January 17th, a Nigerian military jet mistakenly bombed a refugee camp. According to a Nigerian government official, the incident resulted in over 100 casualties. The airstrike took place in a region of northeastern Nigeria known as Borno, a section of the state where the Nigerian army has been in constant conflict with the terrorist group Boko Haram. Both aid organizations and local military personnel report that the bombing struck a camp designated for internally displaced refugees from Ran, a portion of the Calabalge area that spans the border between Cameroon and Nigeria. Major General Lucky Irabor of the Nigerian army informed Reuters that he was unaware of how many were killed. Irabor states, "Many civilians, including personnel of the International Committee of the Red Cross and Médecins Sans Frontières, were wounded." Major General Irabor claims he only acted on intelligence that suggested that Boko Haram fighters were in the region. However, Irabor's claim does mark the first time a Nigerian military official has admitted to an erroneous strike killing innocent civilians. A representative of the International Committee of the Red Cross told Associated Press that among the 100-plus deaths were 20 Red Cross volunteers. The bombing was condemned by the MSF, which regards the attack as, quote, shocking and unacceptable. An MSF spokesperson informed The Independent that the organization was operating in the Calabalge region of Nigeria, but is unable as of this time to identify if any of its workers were among the casualties. The same spokesperson stated that MSF teams have confirmed 52 deaths and 120 wounded victims as of Tuesday evening. Teams are trying to provide emergency first aid in facilities and are stabilizing patients to evacuate the wounded, she reported. The director of operations at MSF, Jean-Clement Cabral, stated, "This large-scale attack on vulnerable peoples who have already fled from extreme violence is shocking and unacceptable." Major General Irabor stated that Nigeria's Air Force had received coordinates for the alleged location of Boko Haram militants. He was unable to claim what caused the error that ultimately claimed over 100 lives, but assured that the military would never deliberately target civilians. For the Global Current, this is Ian Fichet.
Next up, a report from Michael Iannolfo on the potential fallout that the U.S. troop movements may cause with Russia.
This past week, U.S. troops entered Poland in the largest buildup of U.S. troops in Europe since the Cold War. This move is sure to increase tensions between the United States and Russia. Poland is an important ally for the United States and has been geographically significant in the tenuous relationship between the United States and Russia since World War II. Poland joined NATO in 1999. During the Cold War, it was part of Russia's sphere of influence and part of the Warsaw Pact, the rival of NATO. Poland also borders the important Eastern European NATO member states of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, which also share a border with Russia. Poland also borders Ukraine, which has been mired in civil conflict since Russia's 2014 invasion and subsequent takeover of the Crimean Peninsula. The United States government said that this deployment is for defensive purposes. Many in Poland and other NATO countries support the troop deployment, including the current Prime Minister of Poland, Beata Szydło, who called it a great day as U.S. troops were crossing the border from Germany. The New York Times reports that a Polish resident watching the ceremony described it by saying, "Americans coming here is the biggest thing that's ever happened to us." Another resident explained, "Maybe this will stop this guy from the East who has been terrorizing us for decades." The guy from the East being Russian President Vladimir Putin. Beyond Poland, the deployment has gathered popular support in Europe. In fact, support for the presence of U.S. troops in the region is so high that some have entered into Norway, another country with Russia at its border. This is highly significant, because Norway has had a past history of neutrality and even guaranteed Russia that foreign troops would not remain on its soil for long periods of time as a stipulation to joining NATO. Still, despite the support that the deployment has had among NATO, Russia views it as a purposeful provocation. The spokesman for the Kremlin, Dmitry Peskov, said, "This is an action that threatens our interest, our security. Moreover, this is a third nation, apart from Russia and Poland, that is increasing its military presence near our borders in Europe, and it's not even a European nation." The spokeswoman for the Russian Foreign Ministry, Maria Zakharova, said,
"One can say that this is not just a deadlocked path, but a path that provokes confrontation between our countries."
However, there are those in Russia who disagree with the move but do not fear it. Dmitry Efimov, an expert on security at the Moscow City Council, told a Russian radio station that he views the U.S. move as more of an ideological statement than a political one, commenting, "The fact that outgoing U.S. President Barack Obama is desperately trying to deploy those troops as soon as possible proves his uncertainty in the future. They want to hold position in Europe, at least at the level of simple tactical moves." The uncertainty to which he alludes is likely due to the recent election of Donald Trump to the presidency of the United States. Donald Trump has previously said negative things about NATO, calling it obsolete and criticizing the inequality of contributions from European members. Trump has also espoused praise of the Russian president while posturing for better relations with Russia. Scholars seem to believe that Donald Trump will eventually embrace NATO despite his past statements. James G. Stavridis, dean of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University and former naval commander, believes that Donald Trump views Russia in a certain way because he has not seen the latest intelligence reports on Russian activity. Once the new president sees this, he will be more supportive as he absorbs more information about Russia. His skepticism about Vladimir Putin will deepen. Others believe that since Trump chose James Mattis as his Secretary of Defense, a staunch supporter of NATO, that Trump will not remove the newly placed troops and will also change his views on NATO. Thomas Donnelly, co-director of the Marilyn Ware Center for Security Studies at the American Enterprise Institute, told the New York Times, quote, "I would be very surprised if General Mattis backs off from this. This deployment may not be everything you would like, but it's a real improvement." Given the turmoil and surprises of 2016, it is possible that 2017 could have more surprises in store. One thing is certain. Poles remain skeptical about the Russian intentions and are happy that American troops are present in the country. However, positive reactions towards U.S. troops do not necessarily translate into confidence in their commander-in-chief. One Polish resident said, "It's this Trump that worries us the most. There's no telling what this guy is going to do as president. But it looks like he and Putin may have some colluding. It can't be very good for Poland." This is Michael Iannalfo for the Global Current.
Next this morning, Jack LaForge analyzes the annual Middle East Peace Conference that took place in Paris.
On January 15, 2017, the annual Middle East Peace Conference reconvened to discuss the pressing issues that affect the tumultuous region today. Over 70 countries and international organizations sent diplomats to attend this conference hosted in France. This conference is a product of the Middle East Peace Initiative, launched in 2003 with the objective of providing a platform for negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Within this conference, the diplomats reaffirmed their support for a two-state solution as the only route to peace in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Neither Palestine nor Israel were invited to participate in this conference, but were invited to hear the concluding statements. According to CNN, an excerpt from the closing statement of the conference read, "We emphasize the importance for the parties to restate their commitment to this solution, to take urgent steps in order to reverse the current negative trends on this ground, including continued acts of violence and ongoing settlement activity." Both Israel and Palestine have responded to the meetings with some disdain. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu believed that the conference was coordinated by the Palestinians who sought to force terms on Israel that conflict with our national needs, according to CNN. Meanwhile, Mahmoud Abbas, president of the State of Palestine and Palestinian National Authority, welcomed the conference, a sentiment countered by the Islamic militant group Hamas, who slammed the conference as a return to the absurd negotiation approach, which lost the rights of the Palestinian people and gave legitimacy to the Zionist entity on Palestinian land, Yahoo reports. The conference comes at a consequential time as Donald Trump assumes the presidency of the United States. President Trump's views on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict have been candid, causing many to fear that Trump's administration and the GOP are backing away from the long-standing White House principle of a two-state solution in the region. Donald Trump has vowed to move the United States Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, a move that openly contradicts the warnings of the peace conference that no unilateral action should be taken to jeopardize peace. In President Obama's final news conference, Obama remarked on the fleeting two-state solution possibility.
Is bad for America's national security. I came into this office wanting to do everything I could to encourage serious peace talks between Israelis and Palestinians. And we invested a lot of energy, a lot of time, a lot of effort. First year, second year, all the way until last year. Ultimately, what has always been clear is that we cannot force the parties to arrive at peace. What we can do is facilitate, provide a platform, encourage, but we can't force them to do it.
Tensions heightened in the past month as the United States chose to abstain from voting in a crucial vote on Israeli settlements in Palestinian territory. The resolution passed 14-0 by members of the UN Security Council. It is important to note that all countries who voted to approve the resolution also attended the peace conference. Israel responded with particularly harsh words for the Obama administration for abstaining, with a senior Israeli diplomat accusing the United States of abandoning the Jewish state with its refusal to block the resolution with a veto, according to CNN.
It is because this resolution reflects the facts on the ground and is consistent with U.S. policy across Republican and Democratic administrations throughout the history of the State of Israel that the United States did not veto it.
President Obama has long held the settlements were an obstacle to peace, a huge source of conflict with Israeli Prime.
Correspondingly, Israel's United Nations ambassador Danny Danon asserted that it was to be expected that Israel's greatest ally would act in accordance with the values that we share and that they would have vetoed this disgraceful resolution. I have no doubt that the new U.S. administration and the incoming UN Secretary General will usher in a new era in terms of the United Nations relationship with Israel. Israel was then quick to contact President Trump, who vowed to be Israel's greatest ally. As President Obama remarked in his final press conference, the possibility of a two-state solution looks grim. The world has seen a radical shift in our politics as Israel and the United States ventures to a more rightward view, while Europe remains adamantly left. Fox News referred to the Paris Conference on Middle East Peace as simply an exercise in chutzpah, which is a Yiddish word for audacity or nerve. Whether the Middle East Peace Conference or Donald Trump's recent expressed support for Israel are merely political grandstanding or a push for a solution, we must recognize that our opportunities for peace are extremely limited and the efforts of the international community should concentrate on achieving a solution while maintaining respect for all parties. This is Jack LaForge reporting for the Global Current.
Finally, this morning, Daniel Kim brings us an interview with the School of Diplomacy and International Relations professor, Catherine Tinker.
Hello, this is Daniel Kim reporting for Global Current, and today we have Professor Tinker, who is a professor at the School of Diplomacy and International Relations at Seton Hall University, and she is also a fellow for Center for UN and Global Governance Studies, and she also has an NGO accredited to ECOSOC at the UN, known as Tinker Institute on International Law and Organization. And today we are going to talk about the international communities such as the United Nations and many others, and Trump's potential role in his upcoming presidency. Hello, Professor. Thank you again for taking your time out of your busy schedule for today's interview.
Good morning, Daniel.
All right. So just to begin, in 10 or 20 years ago, what would you say were the overall goals for the United Nations, and what would you say are the goals for today's UN?
Well, I think I'd go back even farther to the beginnings of the United Nations in 1945. We have a document. We have the Charter of the United Nations. We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, to establish conditions under which justice and respect, for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained, and to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedoms. Those are still the goals of the UN and of the global community. And the United States was a founder of this and an important player throughout the entire existence for 71 years of the United Nations. So that's where we stand, and that's where we'll continue to stand.
Right. Okay, so with Trump's upcoming presidency, what would you believe will be some of the biggest hurdles that the international community might face under his administration?
Well, I think a lot of uncertainty, and I think we're all feeling this. We don't exactly know what's going to happen. We're not entirely clear because this is an unusual situation where the leadership is coming in without expertise in international relations, international law, and sweeping in new people from very different backgrounds in the private sector, in local governments, and I think this is going to be an interesting era for all of us.
Right. And so the follow-up question would be that do you potentially see the possibility of the United States slowly exiting from the international stage as a global leader by any chance? No?
That's an interesting question. I personally hope not, but I do believe it's against U.S. interests to try to revert to an isolationist position. The realities of the globe now are that we are interrelated. There are vast movements of people around the globe, movement of goods, certainly movement of services. Jobs are in flux all over the world, and we are part of that network of the global economy. I don't really see how that can be reversed in this day and age. But we could lose influence. We could become less of an important player on the world stage, which could happen through various political developments involving other countries if they become stronger, such as China, for example. So I think that rather than a sharp decision to pull out of the world, that it's an important thing for any leadership in the U.S. to try to make our participation in the world stronger, better, more positive, and ensure that the U.S. continues to have a place in global governance.
Okay, so the next question is, how do you think Trump could be convinced that it's more beneficial for the United States to be an active participant and continue to be a leader in the global stage, as his view on that America should focus on America first?
Well, America is strong when the world is peaceful and prosperous, and I think that we are all interrelated. Now, obviously, President-elect Trump tapped into a lot of grievances, and he certainly has a talent for connecting with supporters that's overridden, if you will, normal politics in our country. So this is a moment of change, and maybe that's a good thing. But I think it depends a lot on what kind of expertise the new administration taps. And it's going to be more important than ever to bring in people who are experienced and familiar with international institutions like the UN, who believe in international law and international relations, and who honor our commitments. So let's see what's going to happen on that front and keep everyone involved. We all need to pay a lot of attention and make our own voices heard and weigh in through our congresspeople and our senators so that we are all part of this process.
Right. And, well, in light of some recent developments, such as the Paris Climate Change Agreement and his repeated proposal to remove itself from the NATO if other members do not pay up their the bargains. What do you make of that?
Well, again, it's a wait and see position, and I think the American people need to all weigh in on these things and be educated and aware and speak out on it too. Collective security for our allies is a fundamental of the post-World War II peace architecture that's avoided another world war for 71 years. So there's some wisdom in this. Also on the climate change issue, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's interesting that two of the Trump nominees for high-level positions are aware and sensitive to climate change issues and the risk posed to future survival on the planet. Mr. Tillotson is under consideration for Secretary of State and CEO of Exxon for 40 years experience in that company. Certainly is aware of the risks and dangers of global climate change, of sea level rise, ocean warming. Certainly has affected their business interests. So he could bring that, if he's confirmed as Secretary of State, he could bring that to the State Department and deal accordingly. And Governor Haley, if she is confirmed as the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, certainly has had experience with coastal flooding in South Carolina, well aware of the dangers to lives, property, and businesses caused by these events. So I think with experience on the ground in local government and private sector, it's possible that some of these new people coming into the government will be aware and will take steps, whether there's an official policy line that wants to still continue to debate the existence of climate change or the fact that human activity is the cause of climate change or not. I think that could be a matter for domestic politics if certain people continue that discussion. It's not part of the global debate. The debate has simply moved on. Beyond that, we're trying to deal with the effects of climate change now on a global level. And that's where the administration is simply going to have to understand the rest of the world is doing this, with or without the U.S., and we will be stronger as a nation if we're part of that.
All right. That's all the time that we have for today. Once again, thank you, Professor Tinker, for taking your time out of your busy schedule. And this is Darren Kim reporting for Global Currents.
Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of The Global Current. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. I'm Adeline Patterson.
And I'm Mallory Finch.
Same time, same place, next week.
The Global Current is brought to you by the School of Diplomacy and International Relations at Seton Hall University. Our executive producer is Liam Scollins, our associate producer is Morgan Mount, our news editor is John Jadot, our analysis editor is Marissa Hutton, our technical producer is Trevor West, and our interview segment was produced by Daniel Kim. The Global Current theme song is Acid Jazz by Kevin MacLeod. You've been listening to The Global Current on WSOU 89.5 FM, Seton Hall's Pirate Radio.